Good afternoon, spaceflight enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. So this really hasn't made a lot of headlines as of late, but a couple of weeks ago, about a week and a half ago or so, SpaceX actually presented a streamlined Starship solution for landing on the moon. Not a ton of modifications, but definitely some in order to minimize the amount of refueling and to reduce the complexity of the infrastructure necessary to put Starship on the surface of the moon and to get all of the rest of the job done as well. And we're going to go into depth as to what the entire job actually does here in just a moment. But the whole idea is that SpaceX is really trying to make their case, to make a strong public case, especially arguing that they have always been the best solution for the moon. And even though, in my opinion, when it comes to long-term solutions for a base on the moon, Starship is definitely an excellent option. It can carry far more cargo than any other solution that's been presented, can carry a lot more personnel. It could definitely sustain a lunar city, not just a small-scale base. Now, granted, Artemis wasn't supposed to put a city on the moon, especially not in the early stages, but still the whole idea that Starship would be capable of doing this really makes it attractive for the long term. But right now, we're not talking about the long term. We're talking about the prospect of putting two human beings on the lunar surface for 1 week by 2029 at the latest. And 2029 is really pushing it because China is committed to having their taikonauts on the moon by 2030, and it's going to be a hell of a rush. And I have a feeling NASA would probably like a little bit more of a safety margin than 1 year, or perhaps substantially less than 1 year. So what is this proposal? Is it going to get the job done? And if it can't, then what options does NASA have left? All this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. Okay, so I think the best way to explain to you what SpaceX is proposing and how big of a change overall this represents for Artemis, it's best that you understand what the plan was to begin with, really what Orion was supposed to do in SLS and what it was actually capable of, and really what it was intended to do before the whole Artemis thing came up. Orion and SLS prior to that, the Ares rocket, that whole human transportation system has been in the works for quite a long time, almost 2 decades now, and billions of dollars has been spent on it. And to be quite frank, Orion was never designed for this type of mission. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and go through every step of the Artemis 3 mission to make sure you understand what the different components are supposed to do and what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. Okay, so believe it or not, this was Orion's original mission. Had nothing to do with the moon. The whole idea was to capture a small asteroid that orbits in close proximity to the Earth. And by the way, you can see how old this animation is because it's not the big orange rocket at this point, one of the earlier concepts for SLS and Orion. And the whole objective was to have a ship that was capable of surviving for a long period of time. That is to say, a lengthy life support system that was capable of keeping astronauts alive for longer than the Apollo capsules were able to do, but it didn't require a lot of delta V because all it was doing was flying up to an asteroid that has virtually no gravitational pull, capturing that asteroid and dragging it back, which once again, in space, is not a difficult thing to do, nor does it require a lot of delta V. Orion is not much like the Apollo capsule was. The Apollo service module plus the lunar module weighed 45.7 tons and had 18.5 tons worth of propellant available in order to deliver it directly into a low lunar orbit and also making it capable of escaping from that orbit, whereas Orion has only 9 tons worth of propellant, half the propellant that Apollo had, and a dry mass of only 16 tons as opposed to 25, and a delta V of 1.5 to 1.6 kilometers per second, or about half of what Apollo had at its disposal. Again, Orion was not supposed to be a high-thrust, high-ISP spaceship capable of inserting itself into lunar orbit and then blasting itself out, and even doing a direct abort away from the moon if necessary. Instead, this thing was supposed to eventually rendezvous with an asteroid, make a slow-speed approach to it, capture it, and drag it back to Earth orbit in order for the asteroid material to be experimented with over a period of time and perhaps even mined. The whole idea was to spearhead the asteroid mining industry. So it was a very, very different mission for this thing. And the whole way that it was supposed to be adapted to lunar use is to make it similar in its mission configuration. But instead of rendezvousing with an asteroid that's far away from the moon, it's rendezvousing with a space station that's far away from the moon in something called a near rectilinear halo orbit. Again, not close to the moon. This thing orbits a long ways out, which means that Orion doesn't have to burn nearly as much propellant in order to rendezvous with this space station. That also means that the human landing system, the lunar lander, if you will, has to do a lot more heavy lifting than the Apollo LEM ever had to do. Now, once the objective changed to the moon, Lockheed Martin and the European Space Agency, who, by the way, built the service module for Orion, did propose an Orion Plus solution with extra tanks for a low lunar orbit insertion, but NASA rejected it in 2021 because it was going to cost another $2 to $3 billion, and it would also delay the first crewed flight past 2026. Ironically, the first crewed flight's going to happen way past 2026 anyway, at least if we're talking about landing on the moon, so this might not have been a bad idea, but that just isn't what's happening with this particular mission. So the Apollo era says that one vehicle has to do everything, whereas in the Orion era choice has a split job, with Orion serving as a crew taxi to the near rectilinear halo orbit, or NRHO from here on out, and Starship, or Blue Moon, is the lander that does the hard burns down to the surface of the moon and also to low lunar orbit. So a lot of you are probably saying, and I've heard this before, well, Apollo's just better. Why didn't they just use Apollo again? Why not recreate Apollo instead of using this garbage Orion? Well, here's part of the problem. Orion is designed for longer missions, which is what Artemis is all about, establishing a long-term presence on the lunar surface, not short-term. The Apollo command module only has 6.2 cubic meters worth of pressurized volume, whereas Orion has 19.6 cubic meters. That's a huge, huge difference. Orion is triple the size. Orion's capable of carrying 4 astronauts as opposed to 3 on Apollo. Apollo at most had a mission duration of 12 to 14 days, and that was really pushing it. The Orion had at least 21 days certified, and probably a lot more than that. In addition, Apollo didn't have a quiescent or sleep mode where it could stay docked to a space station to a long period of time, and then you could reboard it and return to Earth later on. Orion can stay docked to the lunar gateway for up to 6 months, so it can stay for a long period of time while the crew stays on the space station or lands on the moon, perhaps multiple times if they have a reusable lander to use. Apollo never had that alternative. In addition to that, you also have a better water recovery system. The Apollo utilized its fuel cell byproducts to provide water for the crew, whereas the Orion has a urine plus humidity recycling system that has a 93% recovery. Also for food storage, Apollo astronauts were stuck with bite-sized food cubes and freeze-dried food and about 2,000 worth of calories per day, whereas Orion has heaters, refrigerators, and a 28-day menu with real meals. Now, waste management, that's the biggest advantage, in my opinion, that Orion has. Back in the days of Apollo, these poor guys had fecal bags taped to their butts with no privacy whatsoever. They had to haul those things out and dispose of them. Just an utterly disgusting process, especially in a really cramped situation, whereas Orion has a universal waste management system with a privacy curtain, an actual vacuum toilet. Also, radiation protection. Orion is far superior, and that's very important when it comes to long-duration missions outside of Earth's magnetic field. Apollo only had a thin aluminum shell with 2 to 3 grams worth of aluminum per square centimeter, whereas Orion has a dedicated storm shelter in the lower bay of the spacecraft with 20 grams per square centimeter worth of aluminum, 10 times the radiation protection. On top of that, there's an exercise treadmill and other resistance devices available to the astronauts on Orion. Nothing as far as Apollo is concerned. And then as far as power is concerned, Apollo relied on 2 to 3 kilowatts worth of fuel cells, whereas Orion utilizes a European service module delivered solar array that provides 11 kilowatts worth of power. So 4 to 5 times the energy available to this spacecraft. And then on top of that, as far as thermal control is concerned, Apollo only had radiators, whereas Orion has an active ammonia loop and body-mounted radiators. Lots and lots of advantages for long-duration missions. Jim Lovell, here's what he had to say about Apollo. 3 guys in there for 2 weeks was like living in a subway car, whereas Reed Wiseman, the Artemis II commander, has this to say after Orion training. It's not a camper van, it's a small apartment. You can actually get away from each other. And just out of interest, for those of you who think that Crew Dragon would be an easy solution and replacement for Orion, let's do some comparisons there. Crew Dragon has 6 cubic meters worth of usable pressurized volume compared to 9 cubic meters worth of usable pressurized volume on Orion. In addition to that, the crew capacity is about the same for both, but maximum mission durations for the Crew Dragon is 10 days as opposed to 21 for Orion. And actually, Orion can probably survive a lot longer than that. And then as far as beyond LEO capabilities, the furthest that Crew Dragon's ever flown is 700 kilometers on Inspiration 4, whereas, well, as far as Orion's concerned, it's pretty much made the entire journey out to the moon and back. As far as re-entry speed capabilities, the Orion has already been tested on full lunar return speed, whereas Crew Dragon, the maximum that they've done is a splashdown from high orbit. The heat shield has never been tested at full lunar energy. In addition to that, as far as propellant and delta V is concerned for Orion, after translunar injection into a lunar orbit, that is, Orion has 1.5 to 1.6 kilometers per second worth of delta V available, as I said before, whereas Crew Dragon only has 300 to 400 meters per second worth of Delta V available. There really isn't a lot of fuel left in Crew Dragon's tanks by the time it actually achieves low Earth orbit, or if it were even sent out to the moon, it would have very little maneuvering capability left over. And then as far as propulsion is concerned, the Crew Dragon only has 180 newtons worth of thrust available from its 16 Draco engines. The Super Dracos are only used for aborts, whereas the OMSE engine on the Orion delivers 26 kilonewtons worth of thrust. Far more, plus it has 8 R4D engines, which delivers a total of 490 newtons worth of thrust. I think you see what I'm getting at here. If Crew Dragon were to be modified into a lunar-capable spacecraft, you would have to upgrade it a lot. Crew Dragon is an excellent spacecraft for flying to low Earth orbit or regions that are close to Earth. But when you're talking about going any further than that, Orion has a lot more capability, and it would require significant modifications to get Crew Dragon to that level. Modifications that would take time and money. So here's the bottom line. With the equipment that's available right now, the HLS system, whatever HLS system is proposed, has to be capable of rendezvousing with Orion in that near rectilinear halo orbit, which is substantially further out than low lunar orbit that the LEM had to rendezvous with back in the Apollo days. That's something that was clear from the beginning, and any changes right now to try to get this job done quicker has to work within those confinements. I know I've gone on forever about this, but it's important that you know all of these details before you hear about what SpaceX has proposed. Okay, so now we understand the different steps of Artemis 3. What is SpaceX proposing? What do they want Lunar Starship to do now, and how is it a better solution for getting the job done quicker and easier than what they originally proposed? Okay, so first of all, Lunar Starship is already a heavily modified starship. And by heavily modified, I mean it is seriously stripped down. This thing has no airfoils, no fins, nothing really for guidance for the most part. It also doesn't have reusable fuel tanks. Indeed, the fuel tanks have been scaled down in the new proposal because not as much fuel is required for the new proposal. That being the case, then, you also don't have as much refueling necessary for the new proposal. Anything that reduces refueling missions is something that NASA is going to like. What it was looking like, though, to be honest, is the original mission was looking at more than 10 refueling missions, maybe more on the lines of 15 to 20, whereas the new proposal claims that it can get it done with less than 10 refueling missions. With all of the weight reduction that they've introduced to Lunar Starship, because keep in mind, the thing just has to get out to the near rectilinear halo orbit and then make its way down to the surface of the moon, and then back up to that orbit to deliver the astronauts back to Orion. Incidentally, I've been talking about the Lunar Gateway. That's not going to be introduced until around the time of Artemis 4 or Artemis 5. It won't be ready for Artemis 3, although it might be depending on how long it takes to get Artemis 3 done. All of that being the case, then, this reduces fuel requirements to some degree, but SpaceX has another proposal in addition to that that really cuts down on fuel requirements, and that's for Lunar Starship to fly out to low lunar orbit, LLO, just like Apollo did. Now, I think you're starting to get an impression of what the problem with this proposal might be. Even though this is going to really reduce the amount of heavy lifting that the HLS has to do, therefore reducing the amount of fuel required and reducing the number of refueling missions, it requires that Orion somehow get down to low lunar orbit in order to rendezvous with Starship. This runs headlong into Orion's hard delta V limit and is frankly impossible. The total delta V that Orion has after translunar injection is about 1.5 to 1.6 kilometers per second, as we mentioned earlier in the video. To do an insertion down to low lunar orbit requires 1.3 to 1.5 kilometers per second. In other words, pretty much all of the extra delta V that Orion has available just to get down there, and it runs out of propellant by hundreds of meters per second to do a trans-Earth injection orbit to return home. SLS Block 1, which is what we're using right now, cannot give Orion a free ride down to low lunar orbit. So what SpaceX is actually proposing is an assisted low lunar orbit rendezvous. It's the only technically plausible one. And what this requires is Starship HLS to perform most of the plane change and circularization burns, and Orion does what's called a very low energy capture burn down into that low lunar orbit. It's a 100 kilometer by 3,000 kilometer orbit. And then Lunar Starship rises up to meet Orion, docks, and then brings the crew down on its own 100 kilometer parking orbit. Now, that does is it offloads 700 to 1,000 meters per second onto Starship's tanks, leaving Orion inside its delta V budget. But here's the problem. It increases Starship's propellant need by exactly that amount, directly contradicting the fewer tanker flights claim unless they accept higher risk or use Block 3 Raptors with higher ISP, which once again we can't say for certain that Starship is capable of any of that. Now, of course, the other option that SpaceX is probably proposing is to ditch Orion and SLS entirely because they can't make it down to low lunar orbit anyway. It's a worthless piece of garbage, and you should be doing this whole thing with Starship HLS. That eliminates the delta V problems, but it's politically radioactive, and Congress simply isn't going to accept it for a lot of reasons that I've already gone over. Just to quickly review them, Starship doesn't have an abort system. Starship doesn't have a heat shield that's capable of re-entering at lunar velocities. Starship doesn't have a lot of things that are required for it to be a human-rated vehicle that will travel from Earth to the moon and back. And there's no way it's going to become that in the amount of time that remains between now and 2029. Meaning that SpaceX's proposal, for the most part, doesn't improve their proposal at all. Starship still has to do a fair amount of heavy lifting and is still going to require a lot of refueling missions in order to get the job done. It might cut down a little bit on the fuel requirements by Orion doing this unique orbit, 3,000 kilometers by 100 kilometers, but still, for the most part, Starship has to do a lot of the work, which requires more refueling missions. Now, I'm sure at this point, a lot of you have gotten really frustrated with this NRHO orbit. Why the hell are we doing it? Why don't we just find a way to dump it? Because we're going to have to do it anyway. It's just not practical for the moon. Well, here's the thing. In some ways, that's true. Low lunar orbit is a lot closer to the lunar surface and requires less fuel to get down to the lunar surface. However, it takes a lot less fuel to get out to the NRHO in the first place, meaning that you can deliver much heavier cargoes and a lot more personnel to a space station that happens to be orbiting in that location. Also, the NRHO is constantly in communication with the Earth. It never really passes behind the moon, or if it does, it's a very short amount of time, meaning that the space station or the Orion capsule is always in communication with NASA. And then finally, another real big advantage is that any space station or any spacecraft placed in a low lunar orbit is going to lose 5 to 10 meters per second worth of delta V per month simply because of the moon's gravity, whereas the NRHO only uses 1 meter per second worth of delta V per year, meaning that a space station placed in this location is going to stay put, and a space station in low lunar orbit is going to require constant refueling and constant reboosts in the same way that the International Space Station requires. The difference is it's going to be a lot more difficult to ship the necessary fuel or reboost spacecraft out to a lunar space station than it takes to get it up to the ISS in low Earth orbit. There are certainly many advantages for a low lunar orbit over the NRHO, but if we're talking about an orbit that supports a long-term presence on the moon, if you want a space station that's constantly orbiting the moon and has relatively easy access to the lunar surface while requiring a smaller amount of fuel to get cargo and personnel out to this space station, you want to go with the NRHO and not the low lunar orbit. So I really doubt that NASA is going to dump this solution regardless of what SpaceX has to say, and SpaceX, in my opinion, needs to find another solution. As I mentioned before, a third stage solution that will send a small-scale lunar lander out to cislunar space without any refueling requirements at all. Unless they do something along those lines, I don't see how SpaceX is going to be able to streamline their proposal. So there you have it. For better or for worse, any HLS solution has to work with Orion's capabilities as they stand now. And sadly, SpaceX's alternative proposal is simply not viable. In my opinion, I think the whole strategy is to try to convince NASA that Starship should be doing the entire job. But we've already talked about why Starship can't handle the entire trip. There are just too many milestones that Starship has yet to accomplish. Starship is simply not going to be the type of vehicle that's going to be human rated for a lunar mission anytime soon. The whole idea of putting astronauts on Starship, launching it up into orbit where a refueling tanker is waiting for it, and then sending the astronauts to the moon, bringing them back for this suicide dive into the atmosphere, and hopefully this flip turn landing all without an effective abort or ejection system. There's no way NASA is ever going to approve that. And honestly, I don't think Jared Isaacman, regardless of how he feels about Elon Musk, is going to put NASA astronauts in that kind of danger. The fact of the matter is, Starship is a very complicated transportation system. It has immense promise, immense capabilities in the long run. But if we're talking about what can realistically be done with Starship between now and 2029, working with what we have is the only solution that's going to work out. And unfortunately, unless you're talking about a solution that rendezvous with Orion or with the Lunar Gateway for that matter in the near rectilinear halo orbit that it was designed for, unless your HLS system is going to be able to do that, it's not going to fly with NASA, and nor should it. At this point, we have only one human-rated transportation system that can safely bring astronauts to lunar orbit and back. One, and that is SLS and Orion. Starship is not at that point yet, nor is it likely to be anytime soon. That being the case, then, the best solution, in my opinion, is going with something else, a smaller lander, perhaps a modified Blue Moon Mark I, as I've talked about before. Resurrecting Dynetics Alpaca was always the best solution, but NASA skipped over that again and again and again. Or perhaps Lockheed Martin has something in the works behind the scenes that they could present for a short-term solution. But regardless, if the objective is to beat China to the moon, Starship is simply not going to be able to get the job done in that time frame. There are too many things that need to be accomplished, and other solutions need to be looked at this point. And once again, I find it so frustrating that the obvious and best solution for this initial scouting out the lunar surface, looking for a good place to build a base for the long term, the best solution for all of that, Alpaca, was skipped over in my opinion, because Alpaca did not have backers with billions of dollars and massive teams of lawyers who were capable of holding up the process forever if they didn't get their way. Jeff Bezos had already demonstrated that he was more than happy to do that if he didn't get to throw his hat in the ring, and I have no doubt that Elon Musk would have done the same thing if he hadn't won. And if NASA has to operate in an environment where doing business with a billionaire is the only way you're going to get the job done, regardless of who actually has the best solution, I think we have a very bleak future in competing against the likes of the Chinese National Space Agency. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, stay angry about space.